We are living in a computer-programmed reality, and the only clue we have to it is when some variable is changed and some alteration in our reality occurs. We would have the overwhelming impression that we were reliving the present, déjà vu, perhaps in precisely the same way, hearing the same words, saying the same words. I submit that these impressions are valid and significant, and I will even say this: such an impression is a clue that at some past time point a variable was changed, reprogrammed as it were, and that because of this an alternative world branched off.
Good afternoon and welcome to another edition of Free Association Radio. Today's edition is the Friday FARCast, and regular listeners know that this is the day where we stretch out for 2 hours and we interview some of the leading edge thinkers and artists and writers and shamans and magicians and sorceresses of our time. And here in this country, we just went through almost 3 weeks of traumatic programming, which we seem to go through every October when it comes to balancing this budget and the shutdown. And this year it was worse than ever. And every year it seems as though the rubber band keeps getting stretched further and further and further. And at some point, it's simply going to break. And to that end, what I decided to do was to talk to some people who have some ideas about what's coming or where we can be on the other side of this old and sun-dried and cracked up rubber band that is getting ready to snap. And ultimately, we're talking about economic collapse and the type of society or world that we can inhabit post-money. And to that end, I decided to reach out to Michael Tellinger, who's an old friend of the show. We had him on a long time ago, one of the early episodes of Free Association Radio. And Michael is known for his work with some megalithic stone circles and objects and all kinds of really interesting stuff in South Africa. Adam's calendar is one of the things that Michael gets very deeply into, and he actually leads tours there. And Michael has been tied to the work of Zecharia Sitchin and the Anunnaki and all kinds of other interesting connections with the Space Brothers of a previous time. But I think that Michael's current work, which is working on something called Ubuntu, the contribution system, is timely. It might have some ancient roots as well. We'll find out with Michael in just a second. In the second hour, I talked with Charles Eisenstein, who is the author of Sacred Economics, and we chatted for about 50 minutes on where we are post almost shut down and where he thinks all this is headed. So you're going to get 2 hours of deep critical thinking about some of the biggest problems of our time: resources, money, work, value, spirituality. You're going to find it here over the course of the next 2 hours. It's going to be a great show. So without any further ado, let's bring him on straight from South Africa via the modern wonder of technology, the marvel of technology. Hello, Michael.
Hello, Robert. Good to be talking to you.
Good to be talking to you again. Just a quick catch-up here, since it's been such a long time since we've spoken. Where are you with some of your megalithic work and your stone circle work? Where's that at right now, and how is that interfacing with your contemporary kind of more economic model based on the Ubuntu contribution system?
Well, thanks for bringing that up, because it's often a point of confusion for people that either get to know me through my work on ancient civilizations and the origins of humankind, and then there's another group of people that get to know me with my stand against the banks here in South Africa, the launching of the Ubuntu liberation movement, and the philosophy of contributionism or Ubuntu contributionism, proposing that we need to move away from money. And when people see me either from the one side or the other, they might think, well, how does that connect? How do you go from ancient civilizations to modern banking and standing up against the banks and that kind of stuff? Well, this is a critical thing. What people need to realize, they're all connected. They're inextricably linked and connected, and it's only through understanding the one that you'll totally or start to understand the other. And this is where the compartmentalization and the divide and rule and conquer principle becomes very evident. The problem solution situation that we are constantly immersed in. What is important to realize is that what I've learned from studying the ancient civilizations and the stone circles and Adam's calendar in Southern Africa has taught me, or has brought me to understanding that the systems that we've had as a human race for thousands and thousands of years have not worked and have been fatally flawed. And it has been the same system that has been imposed on humanity for extended periods of time, as far back as we can remember, for research. And it is from this that we can then learn and put together intelligent suggestions and philosophies and ideas for what we should and should not be doing in the future. And that's really how the two connect. And it's a beautiful, seamless move from one to the other once you see and start to realize how humanity has been controlled and manipulated by the same group of royal political bloodlines that go back thousands and thousands of years.
Well, it's interesting because you say that we've had this for such a long time and it's not working. I would say that it's not working for most of us, but it is working for a very, very, very small select group of elites, the royal bloodline. We know who the players are. We don't have to do a roll call, but how, based on that, why would they be so willing to give up control of a system that they have been dominating on this planet for thousands of years? What would move them in this, to do this, Michael?
Well, they're not going to move, and this is why I was listening to your introduction, and then you're talking about stretching the rubber band and when is it eventually going to break and so forth. And you've been reading economists and reports and economic newspapers on a daily basis how the system and the financial and the global economic system is not only collapsing, some claim it's already collapsed and it's somehow being propped up by some invisible activities going on that we don't understand. The point is this, that the guys, the families that are controlling the printing and the supply of money and that own all the private banks around the world, that supply us with this thing called currency, that in itself has some very important ancient esoteric origins. These guys can play this game for as long as they want. This is why I say they've been doing this for thousands of years. And they mold, when it collapses in the one form, they mold it and roll it into another form. And it's this continuous game of good cop, bad cop, rolling the same extortional, criminal, inhumane activity from one form to another, constantly making humanity, and I'm talking there about not the 99%, I'm talking about the 99.99%, because it is such a tiny, tiny, small group of individuals that seem to control the goings-on this planet, that is actually insane. So, yes, they will not give up their control on the planet. It is for us to take it back if we want to free ourselves from this slavery that humanity finds itself in. So either we continue the way we are, enslaved, completely and utterly enslaved, thinking that we are free, because we've got choices between Republicans and Democrats, right? And that some people still think that that makes us free. Or we realize that we are completely and utterly enslaved on every possible level in what I call the four areas of enslavement, which is the physical, the emotional, the mental, and the spiritual. And that is, in there lies some very important esoteric and scientific discoveries. And it's up to us to decide if we're going to remove ourselves and release ourselves from the slavery. We're not going to be led into this.
So to that end, you have some lawsuits going on in South Africa against some of the banks there, which it feels to me like this is your shot across the bow, your salvos to get something happening and change some of these things. Can you talk a little bit about those suits and, maybe where you are and where you get any kind of support in South Africa for what you're doing?
Oh, there's a huge amount of support, and we've created a tidal wave of support in South Africa. Really, it started about 3 years ago when myself and Scott Kundl, who went on to start the New Economics Rights Alliance, decided that we're going to stand up against banks and defend ourselves against their fraudulent demands of payment on outstanding mortgage loans. When we realized how the scam worked, and we knew that it was a scam, that we were being extorted, and that they were unlawfully, demanding money from us. But we didn't really understand how it works and the intricacy and the depths to which the legal system has been structured to protect and support the financial global industries, that they intertwine. The legal system totally and utterly supports the financial system and vice versa. And it was 3 years of great university and learning about the system, standing up for our rights in the Supreme Court of Johannesburg and facing crooked judges, being handed down judgments that are completely unlawful, premeditated and pre-written. It was a spectacular awakening and education that has given me and Scott and several other people that have also done it in that period of time, but not had as much exposure as we have. It has given us a lot of understanding, a deep understanding of how the system works from personal hands-on experience, realizing how crooked it is, how judges are being paid off, and as I said, fraudulent judgments being pre-written for the judges by the lawyers that actually represent the banks. I mean, it's insane. So it's put me in a position of relative comfort and understanding that we don't have to fear anything. Although this system is incredibly, demented and demonical, if you want to call it that, and evil. And it is completely and utterly structured to destroy anything that stands up against it. We're now wise to this. And I've just about a week ago, I was sent final papers on the very original case that I stood up against the bank 3 years ago. And I'm finally sending, after 3 years of this not getting anywhere and me standing up for my rights and going around and around in circles, presenting evidence, irrefutable evidence to which the banks and their lawyers agreed to. They consented that they were guilty of these things that we accused them of. And even in the face of admission of guilt, in front of the judge in the court, the judge still passed a judgment down against me and completely ignored any of these acts of crimes and fraud that they were committing. So what it has done is made us comfortable that we now know how the system works and what we must do to circumvent it. It's pointless trying to fight it. This is really what I like to say to anyone. Don't try and fight the system because it's not possible to win. And even if you do have a small, tiny victory, it'll probably be hidden or retracted and we've had at least 2 or 3 cases like that in South Africa where the banks were actually slapped with a judgment, a default judgment against, in favor of the applicants or the defendants. And suddenly the case disappears from the court files, never to be found as if it never existed. The person that was up against the banks disappears. They suddenly stop communicating with us, and and they've been paid a lot of money, and they refuse to say a word. And this has happened on a few occasions now.
Well, in this country, there are a small group of people that are working with common law or natural law, and when they do that, they have a whole set of language that they're prepared to use once they walk through that door, and they change the rules of engagement, because here in the United States, we're dealing with maritime law. And so these guys go in and they completely change the rules of the game, and then the courts then have to, because they are actually held to the letter of the law, because that's what they're following. They're following maritime law, which is very different than the judicial law that is kind of an agreed upon set of rules of engagement. Is anything like that taking place in South Africa?
Yeah, absolutely. This is what I've become very familiar with: the maritime law and the statutory laws and corporate law that is practiced by the legal system and the legal profession. The problem is that the people have not really been familiar enough with the maritime law. The only person that was really familiar with it was Johan Uber, and he mysteriously died about 2 years ago in his sleep. So my new book is about to come out after several years of putting it together. It deals with all this stuff. It's got the maritime law and the legalese exposed in great detail in my new book, where I explain all these things to the people, so it could be an aid to them to just familiarize themselves with it and also get more confidence. The problem with this is that the judges, from as far as my experience and one or two other people that have tried this, I have not yet tried it, and I got to a point where I decided I wasn't going to try it until I was really pushed into a corner for various reasons. And the one or two people that I've heard that have tried it were just simply arrested. Their rights were completely desecrated. Then they were released on bail or released, and they had to go back to court to defend themselves, and it's not pretty. So you realize that what you're up to is you're up against the devil. I mean, this is, like I said, remember, these laws go back thousands and thousands of years. It goes back to the Code of Hammurabi in Sumerian times. The first codified laws that were written down on clay tablets that were evolved and upgraded over at least 4,000 years, probably more like 6,000 years that go back. And this stuff goes back. This is nothing new, right?
Yeah.
And connected to this is the printing and the issuing of money.
Right.
Every step of the way.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay? And again, this is where I need to remind people, if they don't know this, in my book and in my lectures, I show people the origins of money. And the origins of money is not what most people think. Money is not a consequence of thousands of years of barter and trade. That is a lie, absolute blatant lie. And that lie was perpetrated or propagated or promoted so that people will have this image of money always sort of in association with human evolution. And if humans can imagine money being there all the time as we evolve from caveman to modern humans, and money was always there in some form or another, then we all believe that money is inextricably linked to our existence. And that is the biggest lie we've ever been spun. That is not the case. Money was maliciously and consciously introduced as a tool of enslavement for no other reason, a tool of enslavement. And this is where it becomes quite tricky for some people. If they still, up against the banks or worrying about the financial system and the banks charge too much interest and that they're so nasty and they don't want to give them a loan and all this kind of stuff, let me just put you out of your misery. Okay? It's not about the money. The money is just the tool of control, the absolute tool of control. That's what it's become today. It's about the control, about the small group of families or these royal bloodlines that have controlled the goings-on on this planet. Mm-hmm. And it's all about the minerals, it's all about the resources, what they do with it, and how they use it, what they use it for. That's a whole other interesting debate, right?
Absolutely.
But it's not about the money, it's about the control. Because these banking families, these royal bloodlines, these elite families, they can print as much money as they want. That rubber band will never stretch. And if it stretches beyond breaking, believe me, it will be by their design. It's not going to be by our design.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing that's going to happen by the design of humans is the moment we choose to stop using their money.
Mm-hmm.
That is the only defense mechanism we truly have.
Mm-hmm.
And it is the most effective defense mechanism. And you can see how effectively they dealt with leaders throughout the history of our planet that chose to stand up against the banksters.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Money has always had an arbitrary value. It's an agreed upon sort of consensual exchange, but it's even more abstract than ever before when we're supposed to have, these, metal-backed currencies or resource-backed currencies. And really, the only thing that's backing money now is the fact that China holds a lot of worthless paper, and that we all tend to agree more or less that it is what it's worth. And once you kind of understand that, it begins to take on a very different kind of connotation, and it almost seems surreal at that point.
It's totally surreal, but we must be very careful. Some people, there's so much going on about the misunderstanding, misconception of money. It is spectacular how I see people respond to this, and the thought of a world without money sends shivers up the spine of many people because they just can't imagine a world without money. Well, let me put your mind at ease. A world without money is a world of abundance because money is the obstacle and the hurdle to all progress. Now, many people that still claim, it's not money, it's not money that's evil, it's the love of money that's evil. No, not at all. It's the presence of money that causes all the problems. And the fact that some people still argue, well, we must go back to metals-based or backed currency or something. Well, what exactly are you saying when you say that? You're just showing how ignorant you are by making those kind of statements. Because this is exactly how these central bankers steal our natural resources right in front of our noses. Mm-hmm. Because what they do when the money, when the gold and the platinum and the diamonds come out of the ground, who pays for these? The central banks pay for them. The central banks pay the mining companies with these fancy pieces of paper, with bonds and certificates and whatever they call it. They're just blank pieces of paper that have got fancy logos and stamps on it. They pay the mines and the companies with these, which they get exchanged for money, or they pay them with normal money. It all depends who and when these mining companies are. So what happens is these central banks take blank pieces of paper, they put some logos on it, and they pay for all the minerals and resources that we, the people, mine out of the ground. They paid nothing for it, and they take ownership of it, and they start dealing and trading it and selling it to other companies and traders around the world. So, when people say asset-backed or gold-backed money, it just means that we're allowing the central banks to steal the gold and the silver from right in front of our noses.
Absolutely. Yep. You're on the money, pardon the pun, with that. So
the only answer to this is really simple. Get rid of the money. Get rid of all forms of money, all forms of barter or trade or exchange, anything to do with value attached to things, and start operating on an Ubuntu or a contributionist system where everybody's contribution is deemed to be equally valuable. People live in communities that they choose to, so their contribution is respected and valued, and they're loved for what it is they contribute, whether they're a rocket scientist, a shoemaker, an engineer, or a baker, or a restaurateur, or a forester, or a farmer. There are millions of people with millions of skills and passions, what I call laborers of love, that they would love to do, but they precluded or prevented from doing that in a money capitalistic driven society. So the moment you remove money from the system, you in essence remove the hurdle to progress and the hurdle to millions of people doing millions of things that will benefit everyone in their community.
Okay, I have to play devil's advocate just a little bit. I mean, I'm with you. I understand this, and I see a lot of merit in it. But I assume that you travel, you come to the United States, you have to buy a plane ticket, you speak in places. I'm assuming you get paid for that. At what level do you kind of struggle or still work with this as part of your own personal paradigm shift? How much Ubuntu do you do at home? Can you live the kind of life that you have been living as a speaker and a presenter and bringing your work to the world on an Ubuntu basis?
Okay, you're crossing wires there, Robert. You're assuming that we can create aspects of Ubuntu, contributionism, trapped in the capitalistic system. That's never going to happen.
Right.
It's either the one or the other. They cannot coexist symbiotically.
Right. So I guess what I'm asking you though is that do you still partake in the capitalist system at all?
Well, of course we do. All of us do. We like it or not. We're trapped in it.
Right.
Everything around us is structured, has been structured for thousands and thousands of years to operate on this system.
Yeah.
The only way to break it is to stop using the money.
Okay.
Because if you stop using their money, they have no control over us. They will send their armies and the police force to try and suppress us and turn us into criminals. But that's when the 99.99% will have to stand up and say, we've had enough. And that incidentally includes the police force, the military, the army, the navy, the air force, all the so-called forces that are abused and hoodwinked by the governments and the banksters that control our governments into believing that they're actually upholding the rights and liberties of the people and the citizens of the republic or the country, without realizing that they're actually upholding the draconian laws of a corrupt corporate government that is owned by the bankers against their own brothers, sisters, mothers, and fathers. So when the armies and the navies and the police forces realize that they're actually just upholding this corrupt, extortionist, draconian, Babylonian empire, right?
Yep.
They'll be very, very pissed off. And this is something that's probably going to start happening very soon as this movement and this consciousness starts to grow. And once that starts to happen exponentially through these defense and military forces, all hell's going to break loose, and they will not support and stand up to support the draconian governments that have abused them. Because they'll be pissed off. They'll realize they were putting their lives on their necks on the line and risking their lives for a bunch of liars and criminals.
Well, yeah, I think.
I digress there a little bit. So just to come back to, so you can't really have a contributionist system operating alongside a capitalistic system. The contributionist system will overtake the capitalist system very, very quickly. And in my book, I show a very simple example how this happens. Because it's just the laws of nature that take over. And people will automatically gravitate towards the community of their choice, where they have everything they need, where they are respected and loved for what it is that they are good at doing, contributing to their community, rather than be attracted to a city where they have to work like slaves 40 hours a week to earn some lousy money to be able to pay rent and buy some bread and milk and pay electricity just so they can survive, and at the end of the month start the same cycle all over again. So the Ubuntu communities, the moment you have one successful Ubuntu contributionist community, whether it's in the United States, whether it's in Iraq, whether it's in India or New Zealand or South Africa or Germany, the first successfully independent Ubuntu community that generates abundance, and this is the key thing here, because many people get confused about sustainable communities and contribution communities. There's a big difference between the two. So self-sustained communities sustain themselves and they create a closed system. Anyone that understands anything about science or physics will understand that closed systems do not survive. They suffocate themselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Ubuntu contribution is actually about opening the system and creating not only self-sustainability, but sustaining everyone around you at the same time, the ones closest to you. And the moment a little community like that springs into action, where the people have grow their own food, create all the energy they need from brilliant minds, have the technology and the development, and you can let your mind run free with this, right? From clothing to industry to whatever you imagine. It's created by a small community of 1,000 or 5,000 people, doesn't matter how big it is. the neighboring communities. It's not going to take long for the neighboring communities to adopt the same system.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, they're going to be forced into adopting the same system because all their people from the neighboring communities will be coming to your community to buy all their stuff because it's going to be infinitely cheaper than what they're getting it at their Walmarts or their supermarkets in their towns.
Mm-hmm. Well, so for me, I guess with that model that there would have to be, and again, pardon the use of a kind of an economic term, but a very deep buy-in to the entire philosophy and spirit, because I could see an example where if it wasn't like a complete commitment and what they call in sales transference, that you would have people within that community trying to negotiate and assign value. Like, say, for instance, you would have a guy who likes to build rocket engines, and then you have another guy who likes to, carve, lawn ornaments. And the guy who's the rocket scientist says, my contribution is more important than this fellow over here who's carving a lawn ornament, because the rockets are going to help us go to the stars and have, an Ubuntu economy on another planet somewhere. So I'm just trying to understand how you would cross that bridge of, the assigned value of what one person brings versus what another person brings.
Robert, you just put a big smile on my face because that is normally one of the 13 most frequently asked questions.
I figured I'd hit one of them eventually.
Yeah, and it's just fantastic. And I must tell you that I deal with all of them in great detail in my book because, you see, your question is still trapped in the capitalistic model. The entire premise of your question is based on our mindset and poisoned minds of thinking from a capitalistic perspective. That what we do must have some value, otherwise how do we survive, right? Because what is the ultimate outcome of your question? Why the value in this country? Well, my contribution is more valuable. What is the purpose of that value? Remember that the rocket scientist has access to everything and anything that he needs, just like the gardener or the guy that mows the lawn in the parks.
Mm-hmm.
They all have access to the best designs in housing. All the architects and the town planners and the landscapers in town do the same for everyone. Mm-hmm. And the food that's provided by the farmers and those that provide the food is available to everyone. So why would the one's contribution be more valuable than the other one? Everyone is just a member of the same community doing what it is they love to do. If the people of the community do not support the rocket scientists, do not provide the rocket scientists with all the components to build the rocket, and part of that is a long chain reaction of components that need to be made by other people who also do what they do because they love to do what they do and are respected and loved for it. So the rocket scientist ain't going to send anything to Mars unless he's loved and respected and honored, just like everyone else is, for whatever it is that they contribute to the greater benefit of all.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if that answers it slightly.
No, it does, and I kind of couched it because I think that for people to be a part of a society like this, again, there would have to be a very deep commitment and a really tacit and complete understanding about not just what people would be exchanging, but the type of values that you're talking about.
Remember that you use the word exchanging. You've got to scrap that right away. There is no exchange.
Okay, so it's all gift, all contribution.
It's all contribution. Everything is available to everyone all the time, not for abuse, for having a beautiful life, so that there's no hoarding. If you know that everything is available, that if you need a new window, you go to the carpenter and he makes you a new window. That the builders or the guys that do the repairs that are good at structural engineering, in renewable, natural building materials, because all towns and communities will be built on sacred geometrical patterns. Because we understand that the flow of energy in towns and our living environment is equally important to activate our consciousness. So everything the entire way we see life today changes dramatically the moment you remove money. Mm-hmm. Everything changes. Mm-hmm. Our towns and cities change completely. The way we interact with each other changes completely. The way we do things change completely. For example, you said there has to be a deep commitment. Actually, there doesn't have to be a deep commitment at all. There's no commitment at all. It's just what you do, what you decide to do for your community that they agree for you to do for them.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you say you're a sculptor, and if your community, if you're a Michelangelo kind of sculptor, and the people in your community just absolutely adore your sculptures, of course they're going to want you to be the local sculptor that will beautify their town. And if you're the rocket scientist, of course they'll want you to do the rocket science. If you're an electrical engineer that's developing alternative energy to give everyone free energy, of course they're going to support you to do that and give you whatever it is you need to do to achieve what you achieve. And so it goes.
How close are you, Michael, to actually creating a fully functioning Ubuntu community in South Africa?
Well, you realize we up against the dragon, the devil.
Mm-hmm.
So the biggest problem is always finding the space and the land that is free of government control or taxes or some sort of levies and money that needs to be paid to somebody somewhere. In the United States, that kind of land is found in the Native American, in the reservations,
mm-hmm.
which I believe could be the seeds for these Ubuntu communities, because the American government can't lay their hands on that land and they can't tax them, and they could be the seeds for these Ubuntu communities. And I suggest that in South Africa, a similar situation is beckoning us, which is the traditional leaders in South Africa. There are about 200 traditional leaders with vast amounts of land that they have that the government has no access to and does not tax in any way. The problem with these traditional leaders and their land is that they've lost many of their people. They've left these traditional lands in search of money and fame in the cities, and then they get stuck in the city. They end up living in the ghetto, and there's no way out. They can't actually leave. They're trapped there.
Mm-hmm.
So one of our visions is to deal with traditional leaders and start sharing the principles of Ubuntu with them. The beautiful thing is that they're all African, so they understand Ubuntu and contributionism. We need to explain to them how we propose to implement this, how we propose to invite brilliant minds into the area to repopulate and reactivate their land, their chiefdoms, because at the moment they are chiefs to nothing, chiefs to nobody, with all this land and chiefs to no one. And the same can happen in the United States, in Australia, and in many countries of the world where such land is available. Our job right now, I believe, is while we are trying to put such a community together at great cost to my sanity and friend Louise, I guess we're at times going through lots of stress. I believe that it may not be us that present the first Ubuntu model community. That it might be somebody somewhere that we've never heard of that will initiate this and will put it together a lot easier than we could do it where we are.
Mm-hmm. Just a quick note, I've had John Trudell on the show, and John is a Lakota and Lakota Sioux, and we talked about hemp a lot, and I thought that the Native American lands would be a good place for hemp to take root, and in fact, that's not the case, because the Bureau of Indian Affairs and the Department of the Interior will come into the Native American lands and they will pull up the hemp plants. So they're not completely outside of the jurisdiction of the law, the maritime law of the United States. Though perhaps something like Ubuntu may not be as threatening as hemp per se, but I think it would definitely be worth a discussion. I've always thought, Michael, that the best strategy that we would have to change any of this is to do nothing. It's to just sit home, get to know your neighbors, have about 2 months worth of food, and just say, we're done. We're done with this, and we're not coming back maybe ever. We're going to figure something else out, but we know this is not it. And I kind of considered out the opt-out moment. And it feels to me like, at least here in this country, even though people have all these financial commitments, we're kind of getting closer to a sort of collective opt-out moment. Do you have any kind of thoughts on that strategy, or just where people are at around that?
I do agree with you that people are definitely being pushed to the edge, where they just mentally, emotionally, physically get tired and exhausted, and they just cannot do anything more. You know, we've been pushed right to the edge, and this whole opt-out moment may just come, but that's not a solution. That's just a consequence of the fatigued humanity that can just not be pushed any further. It's not a solution. So what I'm proposing with the Ubuntu contributionist model is for people to start looking at it, reading it, thinking about it, strategizing it, talking about it, throwing ideas around, and coming up with their own versions of it that is acceptable to them, or aspects of it that could be implemented quickly, painlessly. Because when the moment comes, you know, after 2 months of doing nothing, the problem is going to be that if the farmers do nothing too, and everyone else does nothing, we're going to run out of food, and people are going to starve, and then it's going to get to a very ugly situation where it's going to be, you know, bloodshed on the streets, especially in the urban areas and the high-rise cities, where when the food and the water runs out, it's not a good place to be. So I'm suggesting that before it gets to that, before people opt out, start thinking about what we're going to do when that happens. Either people opting out, or a solar flare fries the satellites, so it shuts down all the banks and communications, forced into a no-money situation in any case, or a meteor strikes us, which is possible, and we're forced into a no-money situation. What are we going to do? We're very quickly going to realize that competition is no good, that cooperation and working together is actually the fundamental underlying philosophy that will lead us to abundance on all levels. And it's really this unity and cooperation amongst people, as opposed to separation, segregation, divide and conquer, and competition that has been shoved down our throat. The fact that competition is good, that we need to eradicate from our consciousness. The moment we are in cooperation, everything turns around, and abundance on all levels is just so incredible. And I just want to come back to what you mentioned earlier, you know, when you said to the deep buy-in of this philosophy and so forth, and I suggested that it's not necessarily a deep buy-in. It's just a recognition of what it is that you're good at. But it goes even deeper than that, Robert. Because imagine if people are living in communities of their choice, where they're not stuck in traffic jams, going to work for 2 hours a day in the morning and another 2 hours at night. The loss of productivity, the waste of time and energy is spectacular. If you're living in a community of your choice, where you wake up in the morning with a smile on your face, or whether you're a shoemaker, rocket scientist, as we discussed, you go to where it is that you do your labor of love, because remember, in a world without money, there are no jobs. People don't get paid. So what is it that we do? I call it a labor of love that makes you wake up with a smile on your face. And you go and do that thing that you love to do. But now it causes a real problem, because pretty much 90% of the time we spend from our waking moment to the time we go to sleep is productive time. We're actually creating something for the benefit of ourselves and our entire community. We're going to have to slow down. Because if you're a farmer and you don't farm as extensively as the farmers farm today, there'll be too much food. If you're a rocket scientist and you're going to have you need, there'll be too many rockets, there'll be too many bridges, too many breads, too many shoes, too many food energy devices, too many cars, too many everything that people work as much as they do today. So we're going to have to slow down, and I'm suggesting in my model of contributionism is that the average person in any community will probably only have to do about 3 hours contributing their labor of love to their community. Otherwise, there'll be too much stuff. And then, what do you do do with the extra 18 hours. So when you say there has to be a deep commitment, it is absolutely the opposite. It's actually just a simple understanding of how we put ourselves to use for the benefit of our community, which also benefits us. So now you start at 18 hours of the day left. What are you going to do with that? And this is where people start practicing and doing all the other things they love to do. Because people don't just have one thing they love to do. Many people have many things they love to do and get passionate about. It might be horse riding, sculpting, rock climbing, building rockets, whatever it is they want to do. Right? So now you're going to go and engage in all these things, arts and cultural activities. And what happens when people participate without stress, without worrying about survival, without freeing their minds, knowing that they have a beautiful life? What happens? Mm-hmm. They expand with consciousness. They explode with consciousness. And this is exactly what the draconian bloodlines have imposed on humanity. By preventing people the time and the luxury from participating and having luxurious time to themselves and participating in activities that expand our consciousness, this is how they have suppressed humanity. And this is the evidence is so obvious. There's an exponential rise in consciousness in the world today. That's clear. This is why we're having this discussion, and thousands of radio stations around the world are having the same discussions that we are here today, right? So there's an exponential explosion of the rise of consciousness, and with the opposing implementation of draconian laws and rules against humanity. I mean, you see that on a daily basis.
Right.
That our government is just making new laws and new acts that oppress and suppress human freedom on a daily basis. It's quite spectacular.
Yeah. Well, actually, Michael, I'm hoping that our conversation is actually special and not one of thousands happening right now across the planet.
It is special because it is a unique conversation.
I would say so. All right, here we go. This is probably going to be number 7 on the list of 13 questions you're always asked. Okay, here we go.
Yes.
Criminal element. What I really love to do is pimp. I love to kind of knock women around and get them to do what I want, and that's what I really love to do. Can I do this, and can I sell a little bit of, crack on the side or smack on the side or whatever that thing is? Now, is their consciousness transformed through the Ubuntu contribution, or is it going to continue to propagate until it realizes that it has no place to contribute?
Okay, so you're the pimp. Why are you selling the crack?
Well, really, that was a side thing. I was really talking about being a pimp. That was really the question.
I know, but I mean, let's assume you're the pimp in the Ubuntu town and you're trying to sell crack. Why are you selling the crack?
Because perhaps it's a habit, and it's been, and maybe now it can be profitable in some form of contribution, not exchange for contribution. So I guess what we're dealing with is patterns, habits, types. How do people break out of their conditioning in order to embrace this? This is what I was talking about with the deep buy-in part. It's not necessarily people who are conscious and ready to do it, but I'm talking about people that are really attached to behavioral patterns that are based on really deep wounding or the kind of the virulent psychopathology that's attached themselves to them.
All right, you realize that most of the that we find today is a consequence of the capitalist system and the social structure that we find ourselves in.
Right.
People find themselves desperate, without job, without work, on the street, whatever it is. They end up meeting other people. They end up taking drugs. It makes them feel good. In the end, they end up with nothing except some drugs, and they sell because that brings them some money. So in the end, it's all about the money. In a world without money, you're not going to have to sell drugs to make money. And all these people, these pimps that are selling drugs around the world and using people to do that for them, they all have talents and skills, but their talents and God-given talents and skills have been suppressed and destroyed by the socio-economic system, the education system we have, and follow their passions and do what it is that they're good at for the community. And if now we find ourselves with completely fragmented society where many of these social behavioral problems are simply just byproducts of the society we find ourselves in. All of that changes dramatically in a town or a community that you have everything you need. And you don't have to worry about selling crack or cocaine or whatever it is you want to sell because you need to earn some money. Because now you can go and do painting because you might be the next Michelangelo. And you just do one painting in town and everybody is just going to have a bloody orgasm. Beautiful. And so you can become the teacher of the children of the town or your community, how to paint and make beautiful paintings and works of art so that expands their consciousness. So once you realize that the root of all these problems is the socio-economic society we have evolved into, or grown into, or lived in for thousands of years. And you take away the money, all these problems disappear. The other exciting thing that I want to share with you is those 13 most frequently asked questions. I mean, isn't that a spectacular realization?
Yeah, absolutely.
That thousands, and I must tell you, Robert, I've had these discussions with thousands of questions from thousands and thousands of people.
Mm-hmm.
So it always puts a smile on my face. And the realization here is that all of us are equally poisoned. Mm-hmm. All of our minds have been equally poisoned because we keep coming back to the same 13 problems that we identify that we think are insurmountable. And these 13 problems are the chains of our own enslavement because we refuse to remove those shackles ourselves.
Yeah. Well, to me, Michael, this is really resonant of what the true kind of Aquarian society or the true Aquarian age is versus something that's synthetic, that's, filled with all kinds of strange and arbitrary symbols at times, and is a time game that looks like it's something along the lines of socialism or communism or whatever ism. This, to me, it feels very organic and much more in alignment with what I would call the true Aquarian age.
Yeah, totally. Now, just to conclude that thought process I had is that now that we've identified 13 repetitive common questions, that is so exciting because all we have to do is solve 13 problems and we've got, utopian society because now that we've dealt with those problems, and I believe I've dealt with those problems very, successfully in my book and many of them already on the Ubuntu website. But what people may not have picked up from this discussion is that, remember, the system is based on community. Every community takes care of its own laws and its own guidelines. There is no central government or legally, law designing body that makes laws for you that you don't understand and writes it in a language you don't understand, and then suddenly a lawyer's letter arrives at your house and you're in trouble because you did something that you didn't even know you're not supposed to do. All of that falls away, and communities look after themselves and make up their own laws based on the foundation of human law, which is common law, which most of us have actually forgotten.
Right.
Are inalienable by birth from our divine creator that we're born with. And these divine rights that we're all born with have been desecrated by the statutory laws created by corporate governments. Mm-hmm. So the important thing for people that are listening to this is to remember that your community will decide what is best for its people. Mm-hmm. And I propose that every community appoints what I call a council of elders. They don't necessarily have to be old people, but wise people. They might be very young people on the council of elders. And I suggest that we use sacred geometry because this is very important in the flow of energy throughout all of creation. Like 12 disciples around Christ philosophy. So you have that are appointed by the people of the town or the community to make decisions on a daily basis about what's best for the community, and not have to wait 6 months after writing a letter to get a letter back to say that they have to put it in front of a committee to decide by some invisible group of people in some office somewhere whether you can build a soccer field or not.
Right. Well, that's interesting. You bring up this field piece because the community that I live in, our baseball field just got devastated by a flash flood, and I manage my son's baseball team, and I decided to get involved with the regeneration and transformation of this field. It's just happened over the past week, and people are contributing to this cause. They're contributing their heavy equipment, they're contributing their labor. They're contributing things. There's no strings attached. They just love the fact that this field exists. Their kids play it on the field, and they understand that this is what the community needs. So I'm seeing a little Ubuntu in practice here, right here in Austin. So, Michael, I wanted to ask you, when is your book coming out?
Well, any day now, literally. I mean, it was supposed to be out 4 months ago already, before Louise and I went on our tour of the USA, and I'm literally in the last 50 pages of the final read, just to sort of eradicate the final few gremlins. Probably a few more days, and then we'll release it as an ebook shortly after that. So give me another week to 10 days. Okay.
Well, let me know, and I'll make a mention of it on the show, just to remind people that they can go to your website, michaeltellinger.com, and you'll find out everything you need to know about Ubuntu and more. Michael, this has been a really stimulating conversation and great pushbacks, and I loved it, totally loved it. I want to thank you for contributing to the first hour of this show.
Thank you very much, Robert. Lovely talking to you, and please let me have a link to this so I can share it with everybody.
Okay, fair enough, and we'll see you down the line, and keep up the good work, okay? Bye, Michael.
Bye.
That was Michael Tellinger all the way from South Africa. 60 minutes of really interesting conversation and unpeeling the layers of Ubuntu with yours truly lobbing up many of the 13 most asked questions. I was really trying to find one that nobody had asked him. I guess I didn't fare too well. Okay, so let's move on with the next portion of today's show. I apologize. The audio on my end, meaning me speaking, is a little edgy, but you can hear Charles just fine. He's got a lot of good things to say. So let's get into this because we don't have a lot of time left. I'm the author of Sacred Economics, and he touches on a few things that Michael is talking about, but from a slightly different perspective. And I'll be back to sign out and wish everybody a happy weekend. This is Charles Eisenstein and myself from yesterday. Here we go. My next guest today on this special on the economy moving forward, what can we do about it and how can we change it, is the noted author and speaker, Charles Eisenstein. He's the author of Sacred Economics, The Ascent of Humanity, and The Yoga of Eating. He's in demand around the world as a speaker and presenter to talk about the issues of our times. Thanks, Charles, for being on the show, and welcome.
Thank you.
Well, one of the things I wanted to pick your brain early about is to get your take on what's happened over the last few weeks with this insane dog and pony show known as the shutdown. And of course, most of us knew that at the 11th hour they would have to do something, if just not to placate the Chinese, but to keep things moving and keep the ball rolling here in the country. From your perspective, how do you see what took place over the last few weeks, and what can we do to address this and changes so it's not some kind of traumatic event we have to go through every October?
Well, I think that the shutdown, that whole thing is a symptom of kind of the general political breakdown of our country. We're still kind of living in the inertia of a system that once kind of worked. So we're still, reenacting all of the rituals of that system. But people, how can I put it? You know what? The baby's distracting me right now. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's pretty important. That's an important value.
Radio.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
But basically, system is becoming paralyzed. And, we think that the government leaders are the people in this world with power. But actually, their range of choices is very, very limited. And you see it all the time, someone with very progressive ideas, or it could be, very right-wing ideas. Once they get into a government position, they pretty much do exactly or very close to what anybody else does in that same position. In Europe, especially, we see, ostensible socialists being elected on an anti-austerity platform, and then when they get into power, they do the same thing as their predecessors did. And we have kind of the same paralysis here, where even the Tea Party, they're absolutely opposed to the role of government in society today. I mean, they have very strong beliefs, but once they get into power, they're helpless to do anything about it. And that's one thing that's come out of this whole shutdown and debt ceiling fiasco.
You're a man in demand, from babies to phone calls.
Yeah, I'm just going to turn this zinger off here and find that. Well, real life now is invading again.
See, the interpenetration of the real into the virtual. One of the things that I noted about not just the shutdown, but what's been taking place over the last year or so, if you look at some of the things that's happened under the Obama administration with the sequestration and the shutting down of certain programs, and there was kind of this advancement of certain social change, like, for instance, gay marriage, same-sex marriage, the whole idea that marijuana and cannabis can be now legal in states like Washington, Colorado, perhaps nationwide. On the surface, those kinds of liberties, in addition to what we see with the sequestration and some of the hacks in the budget, almost resemble a libertarian kind of perspective within the Obama administration, whether that's on purpose or just as a matter of kind of their policy. Have you noticed this kind of weird morphing that's going on?
Well, I mean, I think it would be wishful thinking to tease out any libertarian leanings in the Obama administration. I mean, they pretty much fought marijuana legalization tooth and claw.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so, I mean, I guess I see them maybe bending to the inevitable.
Right.
But they're certainly not leading the way on that issue. And, I mean, just, all the surveillance state stuff makes it pretty clear that they are very much believers in this kind of deep narrative of making the world better through more and more control. Whatever the realm, it's always about security. What's the response to school shootings? Well, it's gun control and more security at the schools, and maybe it's a control-based paradigm, and that fits into a much larger cultural narrative, or I would even call it a mythology, that says humanity is on the path to creating a perfect world, a paradise, a utopia, through the technologies of control, both material control and social control. A more complete set of laws, better social engineering, and that's has not been bringing the kind of returns that were promised to it. So that's part of this kind of generalized crisis in it's not just in our systems, but it's also in our stories. It's in the things that we use to make meaning of the world.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, going back to the political paralysis, that's all of this is symptomatic of a much bigger breakdown.
what would you describe that breakdown to?
Well, I think it's a breakdown in what I just called the deep mythology, our whole relationship with nature, our whole understanding of who we are as individuals, as a culture, as a civilization, as a species. We once had answers that were very satisfying to questions of why is humanity here on Earth? What are we? And who are you as an individual person? And what's the purpose of life? We had in our culture very robust answers to this. Humanity, for example, was on this path of mastery, of conquest. We started out as naked, helpless animals, and we developed technology and science, and came to understand nature and to dominate nature, and soon we're going to conquer all disease, and we're going to have unlimited free electricity, and we're going to eliminate all the harmful species, and maybe eventually not even need nature at all. We're going to have robot body parts and things like that, and we're going to apply the techniques and methods of science to the social realm, to the psychological realm. We're going to eliminate suffering in all of its guises, and fulfill our destiny. And this was really strong, say in the 1950s or 1960s.
Mm-hmm.
But today, it's obvious that our conquest and control of nature has been an illusion. That the more we impose our will on this planet and turn nature to human purposes, the more out of control nature becomes, and the more tenuous our existence is. And that's what the ecological crisis is showing us. And that's just one. Politically too. Economics, political science, right? Science, political science, sociology, all of these very scientific sounding realms, fields of endeavor were aimed to engineer the perfect society, and it was thought that we would certainly be making progress in this. We launched, the League of Nations, in 1918 was supposed to end, make war a thing of the past. So, it's obvious that looking back over the last century, which has been no less bloody than any other, no less full of poverty and misery and suffering, it's obvious that our basic guiding program isn't working.
Mm-hmm.
And we're reaching kind of a crisis in our stories, crisis in our meanings. We don't know. What we were once doing isn't working anymore.
Right. Well, one of the things that really struck me, and sort of it might relate to this, is this deep cognitive dissonance that we are all experiencing sort of simultaneously, and all trying to cope with it and deal with it either in a spoken or an unspoken fashion, conscious or unconscious. And one of the things that I thought was really kind of symptomatic of this was the supposed death and killing of Osama bin Laden. And normally, when you get the bad guy, when you put the monster back in the box, the movie is over, right? So for that case, it would be the war on terror is over. We got the guy. But that's not really the case at all. And in fact, the quote-unquote war on terror has become even more strange with alliances with Al-Qaeda in Syria and other places like that. And I wondered if you could speak to that kind of rift in the psyche where we have this, implied threat out there, and even when the supposed end of the implied threat is taken out, the implied threat is still there.
Yeah, that's another dimension of the crisis, actually. Pretty much any movie, any action movie that you see, and a lot of comedies and dramas and other kinds of movies too, and especially children's movies, all have the same plot, which is that there's this problem caused by a bad guy, and the solution to the problem is when you utterly destroy, humiliate, or usually kill the bad guy. Like the Lion King has that plot, the Snow White has that plot. I just saw an execrable movie on the airplane, Man of Steel, couldn't quite finish it. That has that plot too. Even Avatar has that plot.
Mm-hmm.
So it's no wonder that we think that the solution to our problems is to eliminate the bad guy. And this mindset exists left, right, and center in the political discourse. So yeah, we eliminate Osama bin Laden and nothing changes. When the Bolsheviks, eliminated the capitalist class, the same kinds of exploitation and abuse arose in some other form.
Right.
You oust Mubarak, a few years ago, a couple of years ago in Egypt, they ousted Mubarak, and yep, success, triumph. Everybody goes home now, and what happens? The structures of governance are still in place. The political habits are still in place. The ways of thinking that are habitual, the human relations that are habitual, are still in place. And so, more or less, the same thing arises. Not to mention the world global financial system and economic interests and all that kind of stuff. I mean, it's all still in place. So, and so our habit now is to try to find what the real bad guy is. And that's the thinking behind a lot of conspiracy theories. That we misidentified the bad guy. The bad guy wasn't Mubarak. The bad guy wasn't George W. Bush. The bad guy wasn't so-and-so and so-and-so. The bad guy is actually this kind of invisible cabal that secretly is pulling the strings and doesn't fight among themselves and is hyper efficient and doesn't have and hyper competent, and totally irredeemably evil. And so that's actually, it seems that you're thinking outside the box when you say, yeah, there's some other power that rules the world, but you're not actually thinking outside the box. That's the same mindset, just applied to a new subject. Mm-hmm. But it's the same mindset. It's not revolutionary.
Right.
What's revolutionary is to stop seeing the world in terms of a war of good versus evil, and stop seeing the solution as to be won through some kind of conquest. Mm-hmm. The paradigm of conquest is part of the war on nature. It's part of that whole story I was talking about before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting.
Time for a deeper revolution.
I would agree with that, and yet, the people that are engaged in the formation of policy and programs, leave their footprints all over the place. And one of the things I wanted to share with you, because I think it has some merit in a much larger discussion about healthcare versus wellness and things like that, is that there was a paper that was written by Ezekiel Emanuel, Alan Wertheimer, and Govind Persson, and this is through the Department of Ethics, and actually the Department of Bioethics, the Clinical Center at the National Institute of Health in Bethesda. And it's, I think, a very interesting paper, and it speaks to kind of this new model of health, which is all based on kind of uber efficiency and this, kind of corporate top-down, we're only going to treat people between these ages because they're going to supply us with the best return on investment moving forward in the future, and it completely disregards the genesis of the human life between 0 and 6 and people over the age of 55 and 60 because they've got too many miles on their tires. So at some level, we do have to hold people accountable for making policy and driving policy. Are they the bad guy? I'm not sure, but I still think that there needs to be some level of accountability. And that accountability could also be reflected back to the individual's life itself. It can't be one way. I just wondered what your thoughts on some of those dialectics are.
Yeah, so people making policies like that seem inhuman to us. They seem monstrous. How do you interpret that? Well, one way to interpret it is that these are just horrible people. And if I were working for a pharmaceutical company or a HMO, or the NIH, I would be formulating policies like that. What's wrong with those people? But you get into their logic, you get into their institutional culture, and it begins to make total sense. And you see the pressure pressures that they're subject to, and the pressure to make things work financially and to contain costs and stuff like that. And more generally, the whole mindset of the cost-benefit analysis and the mindset, the proper way to make choices is according to the net costs and benefits that you can predict. And when you make a decision that turns out to cause unintended consequences, the conclusion is never that we shouldn't make decisions based on cost-benefit thinking. The conclusion is that we have to extend cost-benefit thinking even farther, measure even more things, change our metrics, or get better information. So the solution to failure and it is kind of control-based thinking. The solution to the failure of control-based thinking is always more control. Right. It doesn't work to do even more of it. So I think, again, it's not that there are horrible people there. I don't know, probably a lot of the listeners have found themselves at some point in their lives in a job doing things that kind of go against your nature, but it's kind of written into the job description. I had a student once who, and you'll see how this is related, it's not directly related, but she was a cashier at a supermarket or something like that. And she had a supervisor that she hated. The supervisor would always be floating around, making sure that she was doing her job right, making sure that she told every customer, have a nice day, and making sure that she didn't just say it in a routine way, but that she looked the customer in the eye, gave a genuine smile, and said it like she meant it, And what a bitch, she said, this supervisor. And then one day she gets promoted to be the supervisor. And she finds herself circulating around doing the exact same things that she had hated before. Mm-hmm. Because it just, a certain way of thinking came along with that job. So I think that kind of, for me, that dynamic offers an alternative to hate, to judgment, to saying, well, the problem is that there are just terrible people out there. Like, it's not that I'm morally opposed to that. It's partly, I am. Partly, maybe on a metaphysical level, I think that anything we do from hate and judgment is going to create more of the same in the world. But it's also impractical if, in fact, the problem isn't a bunch of awful people. And our strategy and our goal is to eliminate these awful people that we assume exist. Then what we will succeed in doing at most is to eliminate those awful people. Mm-hmm. But if that isn't really the problem, then nothing is going to change. Yeah. And has anything really changed over 2,000 years or more of eliminating the bad guy?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it would be... here's my take on that, and you may differ from my perspective, but I think that, once the country got involved in fiat-based lending and fractional reserve lending, then I think some really dangerous doors were opened. And I think reclaiming the currency, whether it's this country or any other country, right, to reclaim the currency, to reclaim the national wealth, whatever that is, I think is really important to any kind of sovereignty, whether it's the United States or whether it's Venezuela or whether it's New Zealand. And I do think that there are institutions that have been given far too much power and far too much control with very little oversight. And I think that that's an issue. I think that's a problem. And whether it's judgmental or hateful, I don't really have a problem with it. And I do think some people and some institutions need to be held accountable. And unfortunately, we do not have really the checks and balances that we used to have. That's gone out the window. Bernie Madoff was allowed to run rampant for years, and there's a lot of Bernie Madoff still out there right now. So I think, that there is a level of accountability that people need to have. And unfortunately, I think we've been anesthetized by low interest rates and really cheap and easy living and McMansions and McFood. And we've become lazy, and we've fallen asleep. We've allowed people to basically run away with the circus or the carnival or whatever metaphor you want to use. So I think that, yes, it's important to understand the other because, the polarization that you talk about, I think, is very real. But on the other hand, I think it's also crucial that we get back involved to some degree because I think there's a deep sense of empowerment and accountability that we need to reclaim in our lives.
Yeah. I wrote a whole book on the main theme of sacred economics is how to change the money system so that it's no longer the enemy of all that's beautiful in this world. So I do, talk a lot about changing systems. I don't think that the fundamental problem is the lack of accountability. I think that the kind of behavior that we're seeing, Bernie Madoff is just an extreme example of something that's systemic. The whole system is kind of a pyramid scheme. But I think that kind of behavior is written into the rules of the system. Mm-hmm. And the rules of the system was something that no one person or no consciously operating group of people fully understood or conceived or engineered. It's something that's grown over a very, very long historical process, mm-hmm. Hundreds or even thousands of years, and it's reaching its extreme today. We're seeing we're seeing it at its culmination. But yeah, we definitely need to reclaim the power of money for the good of all, the good of all people and the good of all beings. Because the way it works today is it doesn't work that way. I don't think that the issue is that the Federal Reserve is private. Certainly it serves private interests, but hey, the Bank of England is public, and it serves the same private interests that the Federal Reserve does. Mm-hmm. So that the change that has to happen goes a lot deeper than that. There really, in my mind, there is no meaningful distinction between the corporate world and politics. They're just two aspects of the same coin.
I would completely agree with that, and we've seen that even more since the election of Barack Obama, and in a lot of ways it didn't have anything to do with him, and in some ways it still does have a lot to do with him. When we had the bailout, we saw this massive kind of fusion between corporate and government entities in a very, very, very fast fashion. And even now, you've got people like Xerox handling WIC, or you've got Bank of America handling unemployment payments and checks in California and other states. So this Leviathan continues to grow. I want to get into some solutions with you, Charles, especially as it relates to the local economy, local community. We see some really interesting trends with farm-to-table foods and local music and independently based music. And I wanted to get your sense and take on where we can apply this in our own lives and within the 25-mile radius around our homes.
Yeah, I think all that stuff is significant, and it's a glimpse of the future. It's one aspect of our crisis is that the age of growth, of economic growth, is ending and has to end. Today we have a system that only works in the presence of economic growth. Economic growth means that people pay for more and more things that they once did for themselves and each other. So, for example, entertainment. A couple hundred years ago, people rarely paid for entertainment. Occasionally, you might go to the theater or the opera or something, but people sang a lot. People played a lot. People knew how to play instruments. People got together and had puppet shows. Every small town in America had a marching band and a parade, and it was a big deal. So this is something that became commodified and turned into a service. And you just go down the line: food preparation, food growing, building houses, repairing houses, taking care of children. All of these things have become part of GDP. They've been monetized, and we've lost many of the skills that are needed to meet these needs outside the money economy and in the gift economy. So a lot of the things you're talking about are a reclamation of these skills and relationships, which means that on the one hand, they're bad for the, quote, economy, They're bad for the economy that's measured in money. Anytime that you're growing stuff in your garden, or taking care of each other's kids, sharing tools, sharing cars, learning how to cook again, teaching other people how to cook again, reskilling, all of these things mean less product being sold, which means less demand, right? Which means they mean less demand, less employment. They actually intensify the crisis of our financial system. But they also make us more resilient in the face of that crisis. Because if you're meeting a lot of needs locally, either without money or the needs are being met by people who you know personally and who could meet them without money through some other informal system of sharing, then when the economic shock hits, you're going to be a lot more resilient. So I see the phenomenon you're talking about as both accelerating the crisis and mitigating its severity. Plus, it just, it gives people a glimpse, an experience of a different kind of wealth, a wealth of relationship, a kind of wealth that can't be quantified, because when you are meeting needs locally, there's something else, another need besides the need for calories of food or any quantifiable thing. There's unquantifiable spirit of some sort, a relationship that makes life rich, and that we're missing in a highly commodified economy like ours.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I would totally agree with that. And so I think that, what you're sort of getting at, and kind of what I've been thinking along sort of the same lines, is kind of redefining what value is. Value of commodity versus value of experience, human value, shared value, along those lines.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think, as an intellectual tool, redefining value can be useful. I think also that part of the problem is the emphasis that we give to such things as definitions, redefining things, as if the change started with, an intellectual idea. Now, I'm not discounting the role of intellectual ideas, but, I know a lot of people who kind of walk around with, redefined values, but are still living according to the old values. Mm-hmm. And I know a lot of people who are not intellectual at all, who are just really good-hearted people who are living according to values of gift and sharing and healing. So, but yeah, I would say that our values are changing. The values that inspired us 2 generations ago, even a generation ago, are no longer very powerful. Many of those values are no longer very powerful. I just keep meeting young people who have no aspiration whatsoever to make a big success of themselves in the system. Mm-hmm. And they still might be majoring in finance or accounting, and kind of going through the motions of what they've been told is practical, but their hearts are not in it. Because the whole project of civilization is much less inspiring, much less compelling than it was in 1950 or 1960. Right. When all the bright, idealistic young kids wanted to be, an atomic scientist or a rocket scientist
or an astronaut,
something like that, or an astronaut. Yeah. Today the cutting edge young people, they want to be, they want to go into permaculture. They want to go into social enterprise. They want to go into ecosystem restoration, stuff like that. Those are the values that are motivating now. And at one time, that story of the conquest of nature was very compelling. It was going to deliver humanity from suffering, and you could believe it without much self-deception. Yep. Today, it requires a lot of self-deception to believe things. Civilization is basically on the right track, and and our ecological problems will soon succumb to the next technological innovation.
Well, as a child, I walked the grounds of the New York World's Fair in 1964, so I can attest to that kind of almost pseudo-religion that was taking place at that time. What you're talking about, I think, in the 50s and the 60s is a culture of ascent and a vertical relationship to things. And now I think we're redefining that, and we could be in some ways considered a culture of descent or dissent and a horizontal relationship to things. Would that make some sense?
Yeah. Like one aspect of that, would be just kind of the pull back toward nature, back toward relationship, and back toward what they once might have called low vibrations. Mm-hmm. Part of the myth of ascent is as kind of this spiritual articulation as well, that we're rising above the flesh and the material into the spiritual or into the mental. But now people are understanding the need to reconnect with the body, to reconnect with the soil. So that could be considered kind of a descent. Mm-hmm. And then the other thing that comes to mind is the obsolescence of hierarchies in place of peer-to-peer networks. That horizontal aspect we're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I wanted to ask you about, this has to do with content and has to do with kind of where we are with content. They're not really related, but in some ways maybe they are. I read an essay on your blog about pulling your content from TED. Did you do that?
No, I ended up actually leaving it off. It was personal. The organizers of that TEDx were just these really wonderful young women, and I didn't want to pull it down. So I ended up changing my mind. Mm-hmm. But I did make my statement.
And your statement was really in solidarity of Graham Hancock and Rupert Sheldrake, and this whole idea of kind of widening the aperture of ideas and presentation through TED. Is that correct?
Yeah. I mean, they exclude certain ideas for very ideological reasons. Anything outside the canon of orthodox science is excluded. And you could ask, what is it about what's in common with these excluded topics? Like right now, they have guidelines. They exclude anything that criticizes GMOs, anything about using food as medicine, anything about the paranormal, psi phenomena, and all that kind of stuff. All of these things, in one way or another, anything that questions scientific orthodoxy, it's not anything, because some of the things that they do have, some out-of-the-box thinkers up there. But if it's a theory or a phenomenon that says somehow that the universe outside of ourselves bears intelligence or purpose or sentience, then that's not allowed. And it's threatening. And so I thought a lot about why that's so threatening, why theories of that kind and the technologies based on them provoke such vitriolic ridicule from the guardians of scientific orthodoxy. And I think it's because when we begin to see the universe outside of ourselves as being intelligent and purposeful and bearing the qualities of self, not really being separate from ourselves, not being this alien world of force and mass, upon which we impose our designs, and we see it otherwise, then our relationship to it has to change. And we no longer can arrogate to ourselves the position of lords and masters of nature, because there's something that needs to be respected there. We can no longer impose our purpose onto matter willy-nilly. If there's already a purpose that's unfolding there, we have to coordinate with that purpose. We have to understand what that purpose is and relate to it and perhaps seek to participate in it. So it's not that we don't use technology, but that it's that we use it with the understanding that it's part of something larger. So we begin to listen, what wants to happen? What's the dream of this planet? It's a very different relationship. So I think ultimately, that's one reason why certain topics are anathema to the establishment, and other kinds of questioning are permitted.
Yeah, it also seems to kind of further, this kind of corporate, scientific, consumerist mindset in some ways as well. I mean, anything outside of that is going to be verboten because, the lords of Monsanto will not allow it. I mean, in some ways, I get it. I mean, I read Chris Anderson's essay on drones, and his drone company, and so I think it's a good thing that you left your stuff up there because it gives people some other ideas. But hopefully, the marketplace will sort of reassemble itself, and there'll be other venues for more outside thinkers to state their thoughts on a consistent basis and actually put up a competing model against TED or anybody else that's out there doing what they're doing.
Yeah, I think it would be good if there were high-quality competitors to TED that, alternatives to TED that, allowed some of the excluded ideas, and that didn't present them in a way that seemed intellectually sloppy.
Right.
And people like Graham Hancock and Rupert Sheldrake do it very well,
Yeah. It gets to this. It gets to my other point. This other piece I wanted to ask you about is that there seems to be via the internet and virtual art, or virtual information, this monopolization that takes place very quickly. Like there's only one Facebook, there's only one Amazon. Really, there's only one TED. And the person that brought this to my attention was David Byrne, and he just posted something recently. I think it was in the Guardian UK. About pulling his content from Spotify, because he thinks that is really the black hole of not just his ability to make money from his music, but the creation of art in general. And he brought up some very interesting points around that. So I kind of wanted to get your take on this whole idea of the monopolization that occurs very quickly on the internet, and sort of the effects of Spotify, and are there real alternatives that people can tap into to create the antidote to these kind of monolithic portals that prop up and kind of get there first?
I'd actually like to read that essay. That sounds interesting. My initial take on it is that maybe what kind of wants to happen is that these basic functions of the internet, they become monopolized because it works better that way. Like, it works better for me if I want to reach a lot of people to post it on one Facebook than to post it on both Facebook and whatever competitor it has. It makes sense that there's one place to do it, which means that this should be part of the Internet Commons. This function should essentially be a public utility, and not something administered for private profit. It should be something that serves the public and belongs to all. And perhaps that's where it will end up going.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to have to go to 6 different Amazons, to compare the best price or whatever. I'd like to just be able to go to one, or to one service that does the comparing for me, and then that becomes the new Amazon. But again, I don't want to have to go to 2 of those services. So I think that this is in part a natural trend. but it should be something that sooner or later, and I hope sooner, enters the public realm.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things that was kind of the big idea at that 1964 World's Fair in New York was convenience. That technology was going to make our lives more convenient, less stressful, more downtime, more relaxing time, more time with your family, whatever. And in a lot of ways, what you're talking about by going to just Facebook kind of echoes that there's this over kind of arching idea that convenience is still sort of dominating our relationship with technology.
Yeah. It's not so much convenience, though. It's that I want to reach. Yeah, I mean, I guess I could say that it's inconvenient to input the same text into 6 different websites. But that's not how I want to be spending my time.
Right.
I mean, I do have some issues with the whole paradigm of convenience or really efficiency. Because, well, for one thing, all of this efficiency hasn't actually made us less busy. Leisure peaked in 1973 in our country. And in most countries today, people spend a lot more time working than Stone Age hunter-gatherers did.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's a myth that technology gives us more leisure time. It does replace some functions with other functions. So we spend a lot less time interacting with material reality in physical ways. But, just because it's way more efficient for 1% of the population to grow all of our food than it is for everybody to have a garden, that doesn't mean that life has gotten better.
Mm-hmm.
Because part of the problem is the very distinction between work and leisure. If you say, well, growing food is work because that produces a commodity that can be sold, therefore by definition it's kind of work, kind of labor. Well, yeah, but that same activity, being out in the garden, could be considered leisure as well. And
right.
So what makes something into work as our kind of pejorative usage of the word implies, and I think that our notion today of work comes mostly from the Industrial Revolution when most labor was very tedious and degrading and dangerous and arduous. So work became something to be avoided. It's something that nobody really wanted to do.
Absolutely, yeah, and those notions have been replaced. I was just thinking about a potential reality show where you could move people from, let's say, the United States and put them on an assembly line in a Nike plant in Hong Kong or Thailand or someplace like that, and then have that person come over here and manage a 7-Eleven or have a real kind of trading places kind of reality show. It could be kind of enlightening in some ways. I wanted to get your take real quickly here as we begin to kind of downshift in this hour. Based on kind of where we are, can you just kind of tap into your visionary telescreen here and maybe give us some ideas or some things that you're thinking about and looking at and might be coming down the pipeline either for us culturally or some initiatives that you'd like to see put into place?
Well, I think that in the near term, we're going to see things continue to get more intense as far as police militarization and the surveillance state and the ravaging of ecosystems everywhere. There's a lot of things that are in motion right now that have a lot of momentum. At the same time, underneath the surface, I'm seeing such a shift in consciousness happening everywhere I go. But I don't think it's just because that kind of people come to my talks, I think that the kind of psychic substructure of all of these institutions is melting away at an accelerating rate. So even though superficially things are going to be much worse, and by superficially I don't mean that, it's not going to cause a lot of damage, but the outward structures and things that are happening are going to continue and intensify until they reach a breaking point. Meanwhile, the new consciousness, I want to be careful about saying new because it draws on long historical roots that go back to indigenous times and are drawn from indigenous people today too. But I'll say the new consciousness is already, it's not just, some consciousness that's happening inside of our heads, it's already being expressed as practical, hands-on systems. For example, permaculture, for example, stuff with energy, stuff with remediating toxic waste, social technologies, restorative justice, all kinds of nonviolent communication, like all of these social and material technologies, they are thriving now, still in the margins mostly, but gathering, a lot of momentum and expertise, and we're learning how to have a different kind of civilization. So I think what will happen is when the old structures really reach a point of collapse and fall apart, then these new things will have the clearing in which to move to the center and become the basis of a different kind of civilization. So that's kind of the overall picture. You'll have intensifying crisis followed by a breakdown or a series of breakdown points. Each one of us leads us deeper and deeper into this in-between space, the space between stories, the space between worlds, where most people don't know what is in store, what things mean, who they are. Identity falls apart when you lose your job, for example, when the world just doesn't make sense anymore. So we enter this in-between zone, and it's in that place that the social and material technologies of, the alternative and the holistic and all that stuff become the new paradigm, the new normal. And that's how a new world is formed, and that's how change happens in this world. On a personal level too, very similar pattern happens. So really what we're seeing is normal. I mean, this is how dramatic change happens. This is how the big changes happen. They don't happen without crisis and breakdown and uncertainty and the mystery and then the emergence, the renewal, the birth of something new. That's how birth happens, for example. That's how death happens. So I think that we're in, the early to mid stages of this process, and it's a pretty exciting time to be alive.
Well, with that, we'll leave our listeners with a note of positivity and optimism and something to look forward to not only in their lives, but the life of this planet as well. Charles, thanks for coming on. I really appreciate your time. I know you're busy, got a lot going on, so thank you, and take care of yourself, and keep on doing the good work.
Yep, thanks, Robert.
That was myself and Charles Eisen. I think he had a lot of good things to say. Big thinker. Deaf. And certainly dealing with the challenging issue of, this polarity, this push-pull, this black-white. He and I differ a little bit, and I do think that there are people who are consciously working towards further and deeper enslavement of the human race, and I don't think there's been any real attempt to eradicate them. Truly, we don't know what that would be like. But that's another story for another time, and this time is over. And I will see you on Monday, hopefully, to the Monday mashup. Next Friday, we're going to be joined by Richard Grosinger, my good friend and publisher from North Atlantic Books. And Laird Scranton, the man who was brought up in conversation with Mr. John Anthony West, and we'll talk about his new book on Velikovsky, and also some of the work he's done with the Dogon and finding connections between the Dogon and the ancient Egyptians. So don't miss next week. More big thinking, more big ideas, and hopefully less tinny sound. I apologize for that sound. I've been challenged here with the sound and the shadow of Mercury retrograde. We have an eclipse tonight. It's at 17 degrees. The Aries moon is always a very interesting moon. It's a fiery moon. It's a passionate moon. It's a tempestuous moon. And when it's in the eclipse, perhaps some things are revealed for the benefit of our nature. And the eclipse lasts, days and weeks afterwards. So if nothing exciting happens, just wait. There's a good chance it might. Still. Okay, that's it for today. Have a great weekend. And, oh, by the way, I need to put a plug in for my kids' baseball field. If you would like to donate to the rebuilding of the Oak Hill baseball fields, please go to www.oh.org. That's www.OHYSA. That's Oak Hill Youth Sports Association, but just do the OHYSA.org. And you can see what happened to the fields, and if you feel inspired to contribute using this old system to help them with their fields and get them up and running so the kids can play baseball, that would be great. Much appreciated. Like I said, I'm experiencing a different kind of community around that. I'm new here to Austin. I'm new here to Texas. And the people that are hanging out, doing this stuff, doing this work and trying to rebuild a really sensitive lives, and this is not a judgment, but it's a very different community than I was used to interacting with in California. Most of my experiences there were with artists and, outsider, crazy, psychic, Marin County people. And there's nothing wrong with any of those groups. I actually really enjoy hanging out with the people who are the moms and the dads in this community, trying to get this field back together. They're good people. And it's great to be able to go into a place and see people pull together when a disaster hits. And it's really strange because it was a disaster. A 100 or a 500-year flood. These fields are on the floodplain, and water just does massive damage very, very quickly. Can move the largest of objects with this kind of relentless force that it brings. So again, if you'd like to donate in some way, OHYSA.org, that's the website. All right, that's it. Have a great weekend. Enjoy your eclipse, and I'll see you on Monday with the Monday Mashup. And next week, Richard Grossinger and Laird Scranton. Here's Tessa's husband. I'll see you guys. Have a great weekend. Oh, yeah. Use your head to discern.
We are living in a computer-programmed reality, and the only clue we have to it is when some variable is changed and some alteration in our reality occurs. We would have the overwhelming impression that we were reliving the present, déjà vu, perhaps in precisely the same way, hearing the same words, saying the same words. I submit that these impressions are valid and significant, and I will even say this: such an impression is a clue that at some past time point a variable was changed, reprogrammed as it were, and that because of this an alternative world branched off.